or input element changes within your browser page very effectively. In order to do that, we looked at how jQuery uses or provides us a mechanism to select any element on the page, which is the jQuery selectors we have looked at, and then perform any methods on those elements. So along with manipulating the UI, one of the biggest reasons why jQuery is so popular is with a very straightforward code. You can actually post HTTP requests to the backend and get data without impacting the user experience. So let's say the user is in a page and is browsing through something. In the background, you can actually go and get more information. A perfect example of that is, I don't know how many of you use Yahoo Mail. When you log into Yahoo Mail, initially it displays some 25-30 items that are there in your inbox from the server. Once you start scrolling down, at that point of time, instead of refreshing the entire page, it through JavaScript is putting in a request to the Yahoo Web Service, which essentially sends in the next 25 results. And without redrawing the entire page, it just adds in this new 25 records to the existing table where the information is being displayed. So that is a perfect example of Ajax, where you're doing things asynchronously without impacting the user experience, and you're not reloading the entire browser window. In order to perform Ajax, jQuery is not introducing anything new. All your browsers support some JavaScript objects. Typically, it is called as an XML HTTP request object. If you have to use that native object, the syntax is a bit cumbersome, and if you have to code it, it would require you a ton of steps in order to do a simple post to the server to get some data back. So, using the jQuery functions, instead of relying on the XML HTTP request object, it is provided as wrapper functions like this get, post, and Ajax functions, using which you would be able to perform any of these asynchronous requests. Ajax, again, it stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Initially, when Ajax was introduced, data exchange using JSON format was not, JSON was not even there. JSON specification was not even there. So back in those days, the assumption was if you have to exchange any data between any two components, you would typically do it as XML. But nowadays, you exchange data in the form of JSON. So using Ajax, you can essentially either retrieve XML data or JSON data or HTML data, or could be another JavaScript function that could be invoked. We'll look at how to use this, but the syntax is, I mean, you can say jQuery, or what's the short form for jQuery? Dollar is the short form. Instead of typing this entire word, so you can say $.get, $.post, or $.ajax, or this $.getJSON. All of them are pretty much doing the same, which is in the background, sending in a request to the server and getting some data back.
Vikram, I have one question here.
Yeah.
Is it sometimes when you do a HTTP post, you tend to call the same page from where you're calling that, from where you're making the post call. It's in that case where you're rendering the same page on the.
Yes, sir, I'm getting a lot of disturbance. Are you guys getting the same?
Yes, Vikram.
You're also getting it.
How about now?
And I don't think it's because of you, Prasad. Even when you were not talking, I was getting a lot of disturbance. Now it is fine, but there was a lot of disturbance.
Right now there's no. I'm
yeah, right now there is no disturbance. Yeah, there is some echo,
my
but
phone
there
was
is no
closer
disturbance.
to a PC Maybe that's what it was. The fan might be.
Okay.
Yeah. So the question is, I think, because when we do the HTTP post, depending on the type of the post you're doing, it might either go and render a new page, or it can render the same page but with a different with different set of actions. So can you just take maybe 5 minutes and just go over how that behaves from a...
Yeah, I think for the scenario that you explained is just putting in additional code to either do a page redirect or directly to update the window or the area that you are dealing with within the current page. What is most important is for everybody to understand where the code processing is happening. So let's say, just a second, I just wanted to draw something. I didn't have anything on this machine.
You can go under insert, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Insert and share, yeah.
So let's assume that this is your So typically when you put in your HTTP request, your browser is sending the request to your application server, and the application server is essentially generating HTML and sending it back to you. When it is generating the HTML, the HTML also contains JavaScript, which is essentially understood by your browser. So when I talk about client-side processing, it's always about the code that is running in the browser. All your JavaScript, jQuery is running in the browser. Whereas when I talk about server-side code, it is running on the server. So your Visual Force page or your JSP page or your ASP.NET page, or that piece of code is essentially running on the web server or the application server that's on a remote location. So whatever we have discussed so far is when you're writing jQuery, that piece of code is always going to be executed in the browser. So Prasad, to your scenario that you just discussed, when I'm invoking my web service, the web service is running on this remote server. So, and I said that without interrupting the user experience, I wanted to, through the backend, call, in the background, call my web service asynchronously. When I say asynchronously, without affecting the user experience. If the user is typing something, it shouldn't be stopped. You should be allowed to type while we are talking to the server in the background. So when that happens, you are essentially calling it using this $.get or $.post. You call the web service sends the data back. Once you get the data, what you want to do with the data is based on your requirements. If you have to update the current page, a small section in the current page with the data that is returned, in the JavaScript callback function, so once the web service is called or is invoked and the web service passes the data back, on the JavaScript side, a callback function is invoked in which you can put in whatever your processing code is. So within that processing code, if you have to redo a section of the page, you just redo that page. If you have to redirect the user to a different page through JavaScript, you redirect the user to a different page. That's straightforward JavaScript coding, and that doesn't have to do anything with the way you're posting the information to the web service. A web service is always going to pass you the data back. Does that answer your question, Prasad?
Yes, Vikram.
Okay.
And just I think you have covered this in the previous class as well. So, and when we are when you're making this call, you can either do a post or a get, right? And and when you do the post or a get, you always have access to some the functions which would give you access to the variables. Is that the get parameter? Okay. Because whenever I do a post or whenever I do a get, if I want to access those form variables that are being submitted, we always use what is that function that we use, Vikram?
Okay, so if you're posting information to the server side or sending information to the server side, the information that is retrieved on the server side is using whatever that server side language is. So if we are using, let's say in the browser we have a login page. Okay, in the login page, let's say there are two. Let's say there are two input elements, right? One of the input elements is txt login ID, and the other input element is txt password. Okay, and I explained the differences between HTTP get and post. Typically, what is the structure of your HTML page? Typical structure of a HTML page is your HTML page is always embedded in standard HTML tags. So any HTML page starts with HTML tag. Obviously, even if you don't put it as a HTML tag at the beginning, all the browsers understand it because they see HTML tags and they interpret it. But if you have to do it the right way, every HTML page will have any tag that you have will have a closing element. So if I put in HTML, I need to always close it. Within the HTML page, you will have a head section which is meant to put in non-visual elements in the page. So if I have a piece of JavaScript or if you have a style sheet, then I'm supposed to put it in the head section. If I want a title for my page that is displayed in the browser at the top, I need to put it in the head section. Along with the head, you also have a body section where I'm going to put in all the content, HTML content that needs to be displayed to the user. If I have to send some information through a kind of a post method, so when I say information, the information you send is typically in a HTML form, because where would you put in your input information? In text boxes, drop-down lists, or a text area box. I'm talking about the standard HTML input elements. When you're using input elements, it's always a standard practice, or you will have to always embed them within a form tag. So before using any HTML element, I have to use it a form tag. In a single HTML page, I can contain multiple form elements. So I can have ID equal to F2, and then I can have another form, and I can have some elements in it and some elements in the first form. But you can never have a form within a form. You can never have anything like this. You can only have an input elements will always be part of one form. So in the form, you have a parameter called HTML form element has a parameter called post and a get. When you do post, any information that is in the form. What is the information that is sent? If there is another piece of HTML here, that HTML is not sent to the server. Only the input elements information is sent to the server. So if I have a login page like this, and I'm putting this information in a table, my input elements, regular input elements like text box, are represented by this input tags. Input type equal to text, name equal to txt, login ID, and user will enter the value, or if you want to set a default value, you can do that. Similarly, if I have to enter it for password, so I enter this information. So when I do a post, I'll have to specify where this information needs to be sent on the server side. So if you don't give a complete URL, it is assumed that wherever the current page is, the information also resides there. So typically, let's say you have something like authenticator.aspx or JSP, or this could be a Visual Force or Apex controller class to which you are sending this information. So if I post this form, as part of this form, let's say I have a button, and when I click on the button, I post this form. When you do that, the information is sent to authenticator.aspx. And the information that is sent is only the login ID and the password fields. If there is another form and there is some other element called comments, that information is not sent as part of this HTTP request, because that is part of a different form, not part of the current form. Typically, you tend to have only one form in a page, but that's not necessary. I mean, you'll have quite a few instances when there might be more than one form. So now the key difference between I mean, you could submit the same information to authenticator.aspx either using post or get. When you pass information as part of a get request, the information is sent in the URL. So if I go to and so I went to jQuery, I went to Google website. In the Google website, there is an input element, which is a text box that you see here. And when I click on this button, it's sending the information somewhere. So let's say I click on, I enter some text, and then I click on submit. When I'm doing this, Google is sending the information in a get request. So if you see here, what they've done is, to the URL, they put in Q equal to, Q is the query that I'm using, equal to jQuery. If I enter multiple words, when you use multiple words, there can be spaces in between. So if you have to send it as part of the URL, you would need to do what is called as URL encoding, because if there is spaces, it wouldn't be able to read the values. So here now, query equal to jQuery plus indicates a blank space, examples. What happens if my query itself contains plus? It just sends it, it encodes it and sends it there. So the plus in my query is translated into %2b. So you don't need to remember this or do anything. I mean, there are utility functions called URL encoder classes in JavaScript, in Java, .NET, everywhere, which will translate this data. So how is this information being sent? It's being sent as a HTTP GET request, and on the server side, let's say my code in authenticator.aspx is going to look like this. Let's say this is my authenticator.aspx file. The code in this is going to say in the server side, there's something called as a request object, and then here I'm going to say request.txt login ID, and this would get me the value of txt login ID. It doesn't matter whether I pass in this request as a get or a post method, it always gets the information when I call in this request object. And that request object is part of your .NET framework. Let's say I'm doing it with a JSP page or a servlet. In a JSP page or a servlet, I would say request dot get parameter of txt login ID. And this would essentially retrieve the values that has been sent to the server from the client side, from the page login.html or login.jsp, whatever that file is. So in order to access your information on the server side, you always have your the server-side framework will always provide you with a request object, a response object in order to send data back, request object in order to retrieve your information. So, so that is how you would send it. But let's say I have to access this information in my current HTML page within a JavaScript function. How would I do that? I told you that using JavaScript, when you use JavaScript, you use your browser's document object model, right? So in order to retrieve this element that has been entered, so let's say I want to write a JavaScript function. I'm naming this function onSubmit, and within this function I'm saying retrieve the value for the login ID. So in JavaScript, you don't need to declare any variables because you can't specify the data type. But just as a good practice, if you want to declare them, you can say var, var, and then say, let's say I'm calling this field login ID. I can say login ID equal to window dot, your JavaScript document object model always starts from the window object. Window object contains the document object. Within the document object, what is the name of the form that I've given here? I haven't specified a form name to either of these. If I haven't specified a form name, you can say dot forms of 0. Forms of 0 would be the first form. Forms of 1 would be the second form. JavaScript indexes always start from 0. If I don't want to use the form index, I can give this form some ID. So in this case, I've given the form f1. So I can say document dot f1 dot txt login ID dot value. This is how I would fetch the value in JavaScript. The other way to fetch this information in JavaScript would be I told this to you in the last class. You can fetch any element in your page by its ID. So document object has got a method called get element by ID, and you specify whatever that ID is, txt login ID dot value. So these are two different ways to fetch the same information. You can either retrieve the element and from the element retrieve the value, or you can traverse the object hierarchy window dot document dot your form name dot your element name dot value. So
from the best practice standpoint, which one would you would the second one be a preferred approach?
Yeah, you just go with this because you don't have to worry about the form ID and stuff, especially when you're working with all these frameworks, Prasad. You are not the one who is putting in this form tag, right? When you are using a Visualforce page, it's automatically putting in the action parameter for you so that it tracks which method to invoke within your controller and things like that. So since you don't have any control over it, what you typically do is always say document dot get element by ID. And even better, if you are using jQuery, what would be my syntax? I would say dollar hash txt login ID and dot val. This is even better than the previous one. So these are different ways to fetch the same information. So if it is in JavaScript, you use the browser's object model to fetch the information you're looking for, or you can use the jQuery function. In the server side, depending on your server side language, whether it is Visualforce or ASP.NET or JSP, you'll have the appropriate object. What the server-side frameworks are providing are a standard set of objects in a web application, whether it be .NET, whether it be Java, whether it be Visual Force Apex, it's always the same. You would need a request object in order to retrieve information that has been sent to the server side. You would need a response object in order to send the HTML or whatever you want to send from the server side. If you want to manage the session information, like displaying the username for the duration of the session, instead of sending it with each and every page, you can store it in a session variable. So session will be one user accessing the web application for a certain duration of time. You keep track of sessions using cookies. I mean, the web application servers automatically do that. You don't need to keep track of cookies on the user's machine. So session is an object that they provide. If you want to persist some information globally, you call them as an application or a servlet context object, depending on the language, the platform, the J2E or .NET platform that you're working with. So these are kind of standard objects that will be there on the server side, using which you can retrieve information at any level, at a request level, at a page level. If a single, I mean, you have the concept of breaking into smaller chunks, which is a bit advanced for now. I don't want to dig into it right now. We can talk about that later. But the idea is, depending on where you're trying to fetch the information, it is sent. Again, in the Google example, information is sent as part of the URL. When you do a HTTP post, information is never sent in the URL. Information is always sent as part of your HTTP message body. So when that HTTP message is sent across the network to your web application server, it retrieves it from the body. But you are shielded from all of this. You really don't care whether it is coming up from the HTTP header or the HTTP body. Your server-side objects, methods, and objects that you deal with are going to be exactly the same.
Right.
So
from get versus post, so get always sends through the HTTP header, and that's why you see it in the URL, and the post will always send the information, the submitted information through the as part of the HTTP body, which is hidden. And now when you're sending it through HTTP, like get versus post, are there like advantages, disadvantages as to when you would use one or the other?
We discussed about it briefly in the first class, Prasad. So get, when you're sending information through the URL, the limitation is the amount of information cannot be more than 2048 characters.
Right.
Okay, that is your biggest limitation. When you do a HTTP post, you don't have any limitation on the amount of information that can be sent. If I'm uploading a 10 gig file, I mean it's millions of characters. So there are no limits around that.
Does it affect the performance of the page?
No, performance-wise, no, nothing. No difference in performance. HTTP post is meant to be more secure compared to GET, because at a low network level, when the packets are sent, when the data packets are sent, anybody can open a header, but not everybody would be able to easily break into the body of that message. So preferably, as a default, as a best practice, always do post instead of get. In the case of Google, it is not secure information, and they really don't care whether you're passing it as a get or a post. So that's why they left it to be the default. Okay. There are no obvious disadvantages of it.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions regarding? I mean, it was a good thing to sidetrack, because I wanted to cover few basics on HTML stuff, because some of you are new to HTML also. So try to follow the structure when you're putting in any pages, and for JavaScript, try to get familiar. I mean, if you know 3 or 4 different things, I think you would be able to manage. If you have to retrieve any value, always do get element by ID. Once you get an element, you can either retrieve its value or set its value. So if you're, as long as you're familiar with get element by ID, you at least know how to access any element in your page. Then there will be some other methods which you can just do Googling on and look for what needs to be done. Let's say I have to change the style information for a particular element. What do I do? So you would need a little background of style sheets and stuff. Since you guys don't have, try to at least know what the process is rather than remembering what exactly to use. Okay. So going back to our discussion, so these examples we'll see how we invoke a web service remotely. Now, my initial page. Sorry, just a second. So so on my web app and application server, I might be having this following pages: login.aspx, authenticator.aspx, home.aspx. Okay, and I might be having some web services also. Let's say. I'm just putting in some dummy URLs, services slash products. If I type in this, I'm assuming that I'm going to call my web service on the server. There will be some instances where you are not necessarily, I mean, especially in the case of web services, the web services might be coming from some other location also, probably from somewhere else other than your organization. Let's say I want to display my I want to display stock codes from Yahoo. They expose web services which you can display from your page. So if you have something like that, in that case you would be communicating with the web server, and it's acting up here. You would be communicating from your browser. You would be talking to some other server that is out there on the internet. So today we'll do examples by consuming some generic web services and not web services that you guys have created. And maybe in the last class we can probably do one example on how to consume this data from salesforce.com web services. But today's example that I'm going to do is a relatively straightforward one. Just to show you this example, I am going to invoke some web services, and before I invoke the web services, I'll show you what data it is essentially going to get. I'm using Firefox here, and Firefox has a REST plugin using which you can, I already have that. So using which you can invoke any web service and see the data that is essentially returned. When you're invoking, I've given you a brief overview, I think, in the first class. When you talk about web services, you essentially have SOAP-based web services and RESTful-based web services. RESTful web services are built on HTTP specification. I think that's adequate to know for now. And HTTP provides you all these methods: get, post, which is what we discussed right now. Put is to HTTP is a resource-based specification. So typically, I'm requesting a HTML file. I'm sending some information to a server-side file, and this communication is typically in the form of HTML. So put is to put some information on the server, put a file on the server. Delete is to delete a file on the server. These are some of the standard HTTP methods. A REST protocol is also built on the HTTP specification. I am going to show you a third-party service that was developed by Telerik for demonstrating some Ajax features. They did some simple examples on Ajax. So just a second. So demos.telerik.com. When I enter the URL, I'm using a HTTP GET request, and you'll see this is my response. 200 means I got that data back successfully. If you look at the response body tab, you'll see that it returned me a whole bunch of products, right? And for each product, it has given me a product ID, product name is whatever it is, number of units available, units in stock, and all of that. So for each product, it has given us some information, and it has written all the products list for you. If you look at it, this is in JSON format. In JSON, I told you that anything that starts with a square bracket means an array. So I got an array of records, array of objects, because each record in the array is between this curly braces, right? Between these braces, I have a product ID field whose value is 1. I have this name value pairs or key value pairs. Product name is chai, unit price is 18, unit stock is 39. If I look at the second record, product ID is 2, product name is chang, unit price 19, stock 17. So for each and every object, they have written this data back in JSON format. Using Ajax, I'm going to populate this data in a HTML page. So you can use either JSON.get or JSON.post. We'll look at the other methods later on. For now, let's look at get or post. The syntax for the get method or get JSON, it's pretty much the same. Yes, you have to specify the URL for your web service. And this is the callback function that I was talking about earlier, which would be invoked. This callback function is the JavaScript function. Where does your JavaScript function run? It's running in your browser, not on the server side. So once you call this web service on the server, when the web service returns data, that data is passed, and this function is invoked on the JavaScript side. So the data that is passed as a parameter to this function, and you don't need to worry about how this is happening in the background. Your jQuery framework is managing it, and you don't need to worry about it. So when I call this web service, I'm getting a JSON object containing an array of product objects. And what I'm doing is I'm looping through each one of these objects that have been returned, and then I'm displaying, and then I'm retrieving this element and displaying that information in some HTML page. So in this case, I'm not passing any data to the web service. If I have to pass any data, then my syntax would be slightly different. You would specify the URL for your web service, then specify the data, and then the function. Typically, when you implement your applications, your JavaScript code is invoking your own web services. When I say your own web services, the web services that have been developed by your organization. So let's say this page, and this current page is, let's say, on Microsoft.com. When you invoke this API lookup get products URL, it assumes that this web service is also running somewhere on the Microsoft.com domain. It doesn't have to be part of your same application, but as long as it is in your domain, Microsoft.com, you would be able to invoke like this. If it is cross-domain, by cross-domain what I mean is, let's say this page is at Microsoft website, and the web service is residing on, let's say, telerik.com website. I cannot have my JavaScript calling a web service from telerik.com and displaying the information as if it has come from Microsoft. It is called as cross-domain. When you are invoking cross-domain requests, you cannot call like this. You have a slightly different syntax, which I'll show you shortly. So typically, if you have to invoke your web services, the typical syntax is $.get, you specify the URL, and then you specify the callback function. If I have to post information, again, you'll have to, along with this method, there are some other options also. Along with URL, if you want to pass in some data, you can also pass in that data in the data object and then specify the callback. Typically, when you are sending data from the client side to your web service, you always try to send data either as XML, string, or a JSON object when you're either doing a get or a post method. So in this example, I'm calling my server-side function $.post. My URL is demo test post.asp, and this is the data that I'm sending in JSON format. So just like login ID, I'm sending in name, comma city, and this information will be sent as this name value pairs. Name is Donald Duck, city is whatever. And when this function is invoked successfully on the server side, this function would be sent. This function on the client side would be invoked after the processing is completed. So if you have to do some redirections, or if you have to redraw a section of the page, you would put in that code within this particular function. Similar to to the get and post methods, there's an alternative which is called as an Ajax method. It's again the same as get and post. Here you will have more options to specify, especially whether it is a cross-domain request, or if the data type is JSON or XML or text and things like that. So do you need to use all of them? Answer is no. It would be adequate if you just use $.ajax. I mean, if it's a straightforward service call within your organization, then you can do $.get or post. But if you're making cross-domain requests, just use $.ajax always. In $.ajax, there are, yeah?
Just one small question here. Maybe you're going to cover it later. So in the previous slide, you talked about when you make a request, you're going to send, you're sending the API call that you want to invoke, along with the data that you want to pass to that web API call, and then a callback request after that web API call has executed. Now, if the web API call also returns a value, and then based on the value, I want to either call a callback function 1 or callback function 2, is that something that can be done?
Yeah,
or?
so yeah, it can be done. So here, your callback function, when you invoke the web service, will get the data that has been sent by the web service. So in this case, let's assume that data is this. We declared it as data object. So within that function, you can say data of, let's say they passed this data as JSON data or XML data. You would say data of that particular element value equal to whatever your condition is. If that is true, then call another JavaScript function. Else, if it is a different value, call a different function. So the bottom line here is that you always, whatever data is passed from the server is always captured in the callback function, and using that you can put in your own conditional logic to call other functions or do other actions.
Oh, okay. So here in this function call where it says function data comma status.
Yeah, data is the data. Yeah, data is the data that has been sent by the server. Typically, you don't even put in a status. You always say data. I mean, you can give it any name you want. It doesn't have to be called data. You can say result. In the previous example here, I said it is JSON payload. So it's just a variable. And here, what did I do? I'm looping through that data JSON payload, and I'm retrieving each object, and then I'm displaying some properties pertaining to that object. We'll do a simple example. I think that will give you a better idea.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So why would I use $.ajax? It gives me more options, especially when you're doing a cross-domain request. So if my website is hosted on Microsoft.com, if I have to invoke a web service on Telerik.com, my data type for the request should be JSON-P. It cannot be JSON or XML or text. It has to be JSON-P, and so it is a way for telling the browser that, look, I'm not getting information from my website. I'm calling it from a different website. So if you have any cross-domain request, your data type should always be JSON-P. In order to exchange data, you can always exchange data in the JSON format using name value pairs. $.ajax has a property called URL, using which I specify the URL for the web service. Async indicates whether this request should happen in the background or the user should wait for the request to come back. Typically, you'll do it asynchronously so that you can provide some visual effects and stuff. Type, indicates whether it is a get or a post request. Here you can see that you are saying if the web service request is successful, then call this function. If it is errored out, if the web service throws some error, then call this function. If it is errored out, then you can capture the error that was thrown by the web service and then display it to the user or do whatever. If it is successful, you get the data back from the web service and then you process the data. Okay.
And here, Vikram, when you so you call that that call, and when you get the results back, when it is success, you can call. You can either send an alert message, or here you're showing an alert. But I can call another API or another function or something else, either in my own domain or a different API from a different domain. Right?
Yeah, you can do whatever you want. It's all coding, right? You can do whatever you want.
So there are based on that we can we can call any other application or any other function in a different application.
Right. Okay. So I would like to do a simple example to demonstrate this. What I want to do is we already looked at this JSON data that is being returned, right? So let's do a simple example where we display this information using Ajax. What I'll do is, again, I'm not using any editor, at least for now. I'm doing everything from Notepad so that you guys understand how a typical page is constructed. So starting off every page, what I want to do is I want to display a web page where I display the product information in a table. But I don't want, I'm not anticipating my server to send all the information when the page is initially loaded. I want to click on a button, which is when I want to do it in the background and populate it in the background. I don't want to put in any code on the server side. I want to do everything from the client side. So I told you earlier, any HTML page has a header and a body section. So in this case, I'm going to do body and /HTML. So this is my starting element, this is my ending element, these are my body, and this is my head. Typically in a head, you would put in the title for the page that would appear in the browser. So I would say title is and I'll close the tag here. And then if I'm referring to other style sheets and stuff, I can do a link and indicate where my style sheets are. Right now I haven't built any style sheets. Similarly, if you are using, if you are referencing other jQuery or other JavaScripts, you would indicate the URL for your JavaScripts. So right now I haven't downloaded the JavaScript locally onto my machine, so I'll just use the public domain where jQuery is hosted. So it starts with script and ends with script. The URL for this is on the Google website, ajax.googleapis.com/ajax. And you have to specify the version number. All the latest versions should be there. And jQuery.min.js is an optimized jQuery file without any comments and stuff. So the download would be quicker. So I've referenced my jQuery page. And here, I mean, you can use div element. Typically, HTML5, CSS, you prefer to use div elements, div HTML elements, because it provides an option to access them to script and then manipulate instead of tables. Also can be adjusted wherever you want, but it's preferred that you use div and style sheets to position wherever you want to put in this elements. So I'm going to use some sample HTML tags. H1 stands for a header, which will make your text in bold, big, just like your word. So here I'll say and I'm going to put in another div element. So I'll say div. I'm putting in a button. When you click on the button, I want to be able to go and retrieve the list. And, putting the label on the button, and I'm closing this input element. When you close the input element, you have to specify just slash, since I don't have a separate closing element for this. So I created a button, and so far I don't have any script in the page. So so right now you can see that there is nothing in the page, just a header. And what happened to this text? Yeah, since I didn't close the double quotes, this text didn't appear. So products list is empty, and I'm asking the user to click on the button in order to display the information. So when I click on that button, I want to be able to call a function which would get me this data from a web service. So script, including my JavaScript code, text/JavaScript. Okay, so when should I go retrieve this in data? When I click on the button. So all your input elements have events associated with them. So if you can say on click equal to call the JavaScript function which displays product information. I can do like this. This is perfectly valid. And then I can write a function in JavaScript. Functions always starts with the function, and then display products. You can either do it this way, or a cleaner way to do it would be, or a better practice would be, you can say, how do you fetch an element in using jQuery? You can say $, and then I will say the ID of the element, which is btn get products dot, when it just has this method called click, and you can just say display products. You can do either way. You can write it like this, or instead of writing a separate function and then calling it, you can also do, instead of this, you can also just get rid of the function name. You can also do this. This is just more of a cryptic syntax. When you do this, make sure you indent your code properly, otherwise it's going to be confusing. So you close the curly brace, and then there is this bracket. So I close the bracket. JavaScript, it's a good practice to put in semicolon after every JavaScript statement. So even though I specified it in multiple lines, this is one JavaScript statement. It is seen as one JavaScript statement. So
I cannot see anything other than the on-click after on-click display products. I cannot see what you're writing on the page. There's some problem with the connection.
Okay. So see, maybe it is your
internet connection. Rani, I think it might be your internet connection. Yeah, okay. I see you as offline, Rani.
Okay.
You're not connected. I think everybody else is able to see.
Oh, okay. Okay, now
yeah, now you're online. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So here, before we proceed further, I just want to show you whether you're able to do, whether this function is getting invoked or not. So if I click on this button, it is not being invoked. It should work. Okay. The reason why it didn't get invoked is not because of this form function. Here using jQuery, how am I invoking this input element? Hash indicates ID, not a name attribute. And when I named this element here, I specified a name attribute and not an ID. Typically, you want to specify both name and ID attributes. So along with name, I'm going to specify an ID attribute. For any HTML element, both these attributes are used. Yeah, doing this real-time examples, you will at least see the mistakes that I'm doing, and we'll probably understand things more because of any. I just want to make sure that this jQuery library is invoked. I didn't type the URL correctly. Can you check if this URL is correct?
Yeah, checking right now. Oh, that's an error. It's not right, I think. Okay, let me see.
Ajax.googleapis.com. Yeah, the URL is not right. I think I missed jQuery. Yeah, jQuery was missed. If I paste this URL, I should get the jQuery library downloaded. So let me paste this URL somewhere. Yeah, it is getting downloaded. So now it is correct. So let's go ahead and invoke our page. And so now you'll see that the button is clicked. So there was no errors in the code. I was just not referencing the correct URL for the jQuery library. So yeah, even in spite of that, missing this was also an error. ID you always need to specify. Now what I'm going to do is call this web service. I already showed you this web service, right? That we have seen here from the Telerik website. Now this is not a web service that we guys have written. We are invoking somebody else's. So what we'll do is, using this Ajax method, we will call this web service and return data. So when this button is clicked, just to keep the code clean, instead of writing all the code here, what I'll do is, I will call another JavaScript method. I'll say get products. This is just keeping it clean instead of putting everything in here. So I'll write this function, get products list. Naming convention JavaScript always start with lowercase, and this is called as camel casing. Every other word is typed in starting with caps. So always put in your braces so that you don't type in any errors. Now I told you for this, for Ajax, the syntax is this. So I'll just copy paste that here. Indent your code properly so that you know where things are ending. So $.ajax, the type is, I'm doing a get, and these are comments that I copied over. And I'm saying that this is this web service needs to be called asynchronously. The URL for the web service is demos.telerik.com/Kendo UI service products. And to this web service, I actually don't need to pass any data. So I'm not going to send any data. It is going to give me the entire list. And in the data type, I'm going to specify my type of data is JSONP. Why do we need to specify JSONP instead of JSON or XML or HTML or script? Since this is a cross-domain request. Right now my HTML page, where is it? It's running on my machine and not on demos.telerik.com servers. So I'll have to specify as JSONP. And if when I call this function, if everything is successful, it is going to pass, after this web service is invoked, this is my callback function in case if everything is successful. And to this callback function, I'm going to get this result object back. In case of an error, I am going to get my, I'm going to just put in error thrown, and I'm going to here in this case, we are doing a simple example. If you want to pass in additional parameters, additional data, you can do that. When you do an example with Salesforce, you'll see the additional information that we are sending in. So if I have to get a particular contact information in Salesforce, you would need to pass in the contact ID, and that is the data that you would need to be sending. So in this case, I'll not do anything much. I'll just, so here $.ajax, my type of request is a HTTP GET. I'm doing it asynchronously, specify the URL. I'm indicating that the data type is JSONP, and in case of a success, this is what is going to be invoked. This is the function that will be invoked, and in case of an error, you will see the error message. Okay, now I'm going to load this page and then click on the button. Here you'll see that it has already retrieved the results. It says results retrieved and has completed successfully. So it was able to invoke this and retrieve the information. How are we getting the data back? The data is being returned as an array containing this objects. Each object has got properties, product ID, and all of that. So in JavaScript for an array, if you specify in order to retrieve the size of an array, there is a property called length. Now, how is this data being returned to my JavaScript function? It is being returned as this result object. So I'm going to say result dot length, and I should get the number of records that I've returned. And instead of displaying all of this information, I'll just display the first record. So I'll say first record, and to retrieve each element in the array in JavaScript, this is again written as JSON data, but JavaScript is going to treat it as arrays and objects. So the first object has index 0 always, dot. In this, let's say I'm interested in retrieving the product name property for the first record. So I'm going to say product name. Then the second record is result of one dot product name. Now let us run this code. I saved it. I'm going to refresh this page, click on this retrieve product list. So the total number of results that were passed by this web service is 77. My first record product name is Chai. The second one is Chang. So if you look at this REST client, you will see that when I invoke this web service, my product name was Chai for the first record. For the second record, the product name was Chang. So as you can see, you are able to correctly retrieve this information. But displaying this information in dialog boxes is not useful to us. So we want to display it in a nice table format, which we'll do shortly. Going back to the question that you had, Prasad, so once you get the data back, let's say if this property discontinued is true, then you might have to redirect the user to some other page. So in that case, what I would do is, once this function is invoked successfully, I would do something like this. So if a result of 0 dot discontinued is equal to true, then let's say if I want to redirect the user to a different page in the same window, Prasad, your JavaScript object model has got the root of your document object model is always window. It has got an object called location dot URL equal to, you give the new URL that needs to be loaded, and the page gets displayed to the user.
Or okay. It could be, or it could be another web API,
you can do as many as you want. So I can do the same thing again here.
Oh, okay. So okay.
So I can do another
Ajax call.
Ajax call in the code here. So you can do whatever you want. The point is you have control. There is a callback function that is being invoked upon success or an error, and the data that is returned is being passed. So if you want to call another web service, and once that web service returns data, if you want to call another web service within that web service, you can nest it to whichever level you want it to.
Okay. And another question, Vikram, here. So here you're saying in the type get and then async is true. So, but we are waiting for the result to get back right away, right? So it's more like a synchronous call rather than asynchronous call?
No, it is asynchronously happening. You are not seeing any difference. Where are we waiting for the request? You are not seeing any difference here, Prasad, because you got the data instantaneously. Where did we wait for it? We didn't wait for it.
Right.
I'll show you.
No, but I'm just asking, in that when you said async is true, that means you're calling that asynchronously?
Yeah, you are calling it asynchronously. That's how it is happening. And as soon as the asynchronous function is completed, the callback function is invoked.
So Vikram, in this case, if let's say the asynchronous, because it's asynchronous, and let's say that the call takes maybe 25 seconds, in the meantime, what if I move or navigate away from the page to some other page?
So those are all use cases that you're talking about that needs to be programmed, Prasad. So if you don't want the user to be moving to a different page, then you want to restrict the user actions that are permissible within the page itself. So in the application that we did for Novartis, we are calling all the web services asynchronously. It takes time to get the data back. While it is taking time to get the data back, what we do to prevent the user from doing anything else is by displaying a progress bar that's more like a dialog box. So here, when I'm calling this search function, I'm displaying this data, right?
And before that, you had little.
So here, if I click on the second page, it is going to. It was again quick. Let me do a search. If I do search, so I am indicating this progress bar so that it prevents the user from doing anything. Again, I intentionally didn't make this modal so that the user can click on other things. But if you make it modal, without it being asynchronous, Prasad, I wouldn't have been able to display this animation icon. Because if you call it synchronously, then the thread is waiting for it to respond, the web service. Right now, my browser is freed up to do whatever I want. So if I have to give that visual look and feel to the user, I mean that progress indicator, I'm able to display it because I'm doing it as an asynchronous request. If I do it as a synchronous request, I wouldn't have been able to display that progress bar because that progress bar is just an element on your page, and I'm just hiding and displaying it and hiding it. So,
by making it asynchronous, you have control over the page, and then you can either put in a progress bar or do something else and give the capability to do something else. And then when the results come back, then you render the page based on the results that you get.
Yes. And again, we are talking about Ajax, right? The acronym starts with it being asynchronous. If you want to do it synchronous, you're defeating the whole purpose. Why even bother doing it from here? Make a direct web service call from the server itself. Wait for the response to come back and send it out. So by default, it's always asynchronous. It's never synchronous. Especially when you're dealing with web services, you will never call anything synchronously. If you're calling other, I mean, you can also call an ASPX page. You can also call a servlet that returns some HTML. So it doesn't always have to be a web service call. So when you're invoking some other components like those, and if you want the complete screen to be tied up until you get the data back, then you do it synchronously. So that is more of an exception than the norm. Always by default, it is asynchronous. And again, you don't need to specify it as asynchronous. By default, it is asynchronous. In this case, I did specify this async true property, but that is just to show you that if you want to make it false, it can be false also. Even if I remove this, it will just assume a default value and the code will run fine.
Okay.
So if
I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so it being asynchronous gives us the ability to put in additional visual effects on the page, like the progress indicator that I showed you earlier.
Okay. And then one more question, Vikram, if you go back to that piece of code that the HTML code. So there, now here for success and error, you're calling the function with result and function with error thrown. Now here I could also say success and then give a function name and then define that function name somewhere down in the script to make it more modular and have.
Yeah, so that is how you should do it. Make it modular, clean. It shouldn't be 200 lines of JavaScript code within this Ajax function. It should always be modular. So what I'm going to do here is, right now we are displaying the data like this, but I want to display it in a table in a better way. So I can just say I can create a new function called display data in table, and I'm going to pass in this result object to that particular table. So this function, if you see, it is 5 or 6 lines of code. And here you will write another function, which is okay. So now what I want to do is, using some of the things that we learned in the previous class, I want to be able to populate, based on the data that I retrieved, a table and insert the table inside this div element. Okay. Now, in order to typically, what is the, how do you create a table in HTML using this syntax, right? Table, and within a table you'll have a row, tr. Within a row you'll have multiple columns, and the top row is called a header column. So typically it is instead of td you specify th. So table row is tr, th is table header, td is the table cell. So in the data that is being passed, we have product. Let's get all of these columns. So what is the data that is being retrieved? You're getting product ID. This is my table header. I'm typing the HTML here because I'm going to generate this dynamically, and it is for you to see how I'm doing it by just concatenating strings and stuff. So what are my headers? I'm going to display product ID, product name, unit price, units in stock, discontinued. And just this is my first row, and for each additional row I have to put in data into this cells, and then I'll do table, and this should essentially create my table. Just to show it to you, I'm going to create this table, and I'm going to put in this border so that you can see the columns clearly. Border equal to 1. These are all HTML attributes for the table. Okay, so this table has 5 columns, and the number of rows, I don't know how many rows that will be there, will generate it dynamically. So now if I refresh, see, you'll see this product ID, product name, unit price, units in stock, and discontinued are displayed in that, and the rows are not displayed. Instead of this table being populated here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate it from my code. So I'm going to create a function called create table header, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate this through HTML, so as a HTML string. So I'm going to declare a variable called variable table header is an empty string, and I'm just going to concatenate this string so that it has this. So table header, in order to do concatenation, plus equal to means concatenate whatever the previous value of the table header with the current string, and string values are specified in double quotes. Since I'm using double quotes for other attributes within this table element, my syntax is this double quote and this double quote has to, and the last double quote has to match. If you want to use double quotes for all the other elements, you have to escape them, and backslash is the escape character in JavaScript. So I can either do backslash or I can avoid the complexity. I can also put them in single quotes. So I can be smart about it and do either of the approaches. I mean, I'm just doing this to show it to you as an example. Typically, you would put in backslash double quote or just a single quote. You will not mix them both. So I just created a string variable to which I've added this string, and I'm going to add the other rows also, just like other elements also, just like that. And I'm mimicking it to the actual HTML so that you are able to relate to it better. I can put all of this into a single line also. It doesn't have to be like the way I am typing it currently. Are all of you guys clear on what I'm doing here? Unfortunately, these things you guys need to try. I cannot just talk about it. You'll not be comfortable unless you try. So I'm just so I created this function called create table header, and I'm building this HTML string so that I can, through JavaScript, write this HTML string instead of I'm doing it programmatically instead of typing in the HTML. So this is the header row, create table header. Similarly, I'm going to populate another function called populate I'm going to name it as populate row data, and I'm going to pass in the information in an object. I can call that object any name. For now, I'm just going to call it as row. So instead of th, you will be using td tags to display the row information. And here, instead of hard coding the value, I'll have to read the value from that object that has been passed to me. So I'm concatenating strings here. So I'll just do row dot, I think product ID is how is sending the data. And this is ID is decapitated, it is case sensitive. So however you are getting the data, you would need to display it like that. Next is product name. So what I'm doing is I'm concatenating a TD string with the actual value that has been passed and then closing the row element. And I'm repeating this process for all my other elements. Unit price is this. Then units in stock. So I just created this utility function to populate the data. So here when the result is passed successfully, I'm calling this function display data in table. And what this is going to do is just say table HTML equal to table, and then this table will have a header. So I'll say table HTML plus equal to, just call this function create table header, and this will concatenate this table tag to this header row. And then what I'll do is I'll loop through this data. So I'm going to, in order to loop through the data, I have multiple ways to do it. I can say for I equal to 0 colon I less than. I told you array object has got a method called length, which using which you would be able to get the number of objects, and you would increment it I plus plus, and then in braces specify. So within this loop, I can say table HTML plus equal to populate row data, and the object that I would be passing is within that result object that particular row information. So here I'm doing that, and you'll see that I've indented my code clearly so that I know which ones I'm opening and which ones I'm closing. And here I'll say table HTML plus equal to, and then I can say close the table. In the last class, we have learned how to empty out a element. So I want to display this information within this particular div tag, right? So I can say how do you access any element? You can, using jQuery, you can say $, and then by accessing by ID, you have to specify hash the element ID dot. There's a method called empty which we discussed. So it will clear out all the current content. So whatever text that was there initially is cleared out. So products list is empty text has been removed programmatically using JavaScript when the user clicks on this tab. And then what I'll do is dot. There's a method called HTML which we again did an example last week. And as part of this HTML, I'm going to generate this HTML dynamically and insert it in there. So you'll see that your code is very modular. When you're calling this Ajax method, if it is successful, you're calling display data in table. The display data in table gets the result object that has been written by your web service. You are looping through the web service. You have written utility methods for creating the header row dynamically and the data's elements dynamically. And here you are looping through all the results and populating each record in a separate row. Now, if we run this code, it should work if there are no typos in it. So I'm going to refresh the page. So now that list is, the table is not there. Products list is empty. And I'm going to click on this. It returned everything as undefined. So we did some mistake here. Undefined means it's unable to retrieve the data. Just ensuring that it is not and I'm going to put in some debugging statements. If I put in an alert here, in case if it works correctly, this row will be called 77 times. So I don't want to click on it. Let's see what happens. So it is retrieving the values correctly. Somewhere else it's failing. Okay, I am not returning the value here. That is one mistake. Then here also I'm not returning the value. Yeah, now it should come up fine. Okay. So the mistake that I did earlier was I wrote this function, but I forgot to return the value. And that is why it failed. Again, I'll just name these variables differently. This is not, so that this and I'll put in all formatting information in here. Border is equal to 1. Okay, so now when I click on this button, you'll see that it is going to fetch all the data and it is going to display in a tabular format. Obviously, I can look at much better with different styling information and stuff. What I wanted to show you is the actual process that you need to be familiar with. So as you can see here, I got in all of the data, and without doing a round trip to the server, from within my client-side code, I was able to populate this information. I was able to do all of that using just these 2 lines of code. I cleared out whatever the current HTML that is being displayed in that section in the browser, and then I dynamically generated my HTML based on the data that I've received from my web service. Okay, so let's say if there is something wrong with the URL, instead of product, so I say product. It will fail. It will not get any data, and it will not populate this HTML. So you'll see that the error message. We don't know what that object returned. We just got a message saying we just got an error message there. So error thrown is actually an object. So I don't know what the properties of that object is. What I can do is I'll go into that later. I'll show you how to loop through the error and get what that property is, and then accordingly display that message. But in general, for end users, what you would do is you will just display some message like this: error retrieving data from the service. Please So if I put in a message like that, when I invoke this service, if there are any errors on the server, they'll just get a message like this. So just that's basic error handling. I'm going to revert back to my web service, and I'll save this. So here, now when I click on it, I got all of the data there. Any questions? Okay. So I want you guys to do the same example. I mean, this is a public web service, so it should work from your machine also. You don't need to write any local web services and stuff. But I want you to understand the basic concept. From a piece of code that runs in your browser, you're able to talk to the server in the background, retrieve the data, and then update the page with the relevant data. Typically, your web services are not going to be this quick, so when you are calling it, you want to show a progress indicator like in the example that I was showing Prasad earlier, or you want to do something else, you can continue to do it as long as the request is asynchronous. Instead of using $.ajax, I could have also said $.get and $.post, and it should have worked absolutely fine. There wouldn't have been any difference other than a minor syntactical change. But whenever it is a cross-domain request, the only reason that this code worked is because in the data type, you have to specify it as JSON-P, even if you have the correct URL. Let's say instead of JSON-P, I say JSON, and I run this code, okay? Now you'll see that there will be an error because this page that you're running is not running on the same server where the web service is hosted. So it will say error retrieving the data from the service. And the reason for this error is because I didn't send the data type as JSON-P. I sent it as JSON. That is the main difference.
So if it is, if you're trying to invoke a web service from a different, that's when you have to use.
Yes,
JSON-P.
From a different domain, yeah, you will have to use JSON-P. So typically in your code, if you're writing Visualforce page and the Visualforce page has some JavaScript which is making calls to other web services on Salesforce, you don't need to specify it as JSON-P because even the parent page is coming from salesforce.com domain. So you would just indicate JSON or XML or whatever. But if you have a native application that is running in your organization that wants to talk to Salesforce and retrieve the data, then those pages should have JSON-P as the format.
So Vikram, as a practice, instead of using JSON and JSON-P, if we just continue using JSON-P for all the calls, is there any downside?
For your internal service, it will not work. It will fail. For your internal service,
will fail. Okay.
You have to use JSON. I mean, there are no downsides to all of these things. It will either work or not work. So, and you should pass in the correct data type. So, what are the various options I have here? I can say JSON, JSON-P, or XML, or text, or HTML, or script. These are my various options for specifying data type. And based on that corresponding data type, when you get the result, if it is an XML, you will have to write code to parse the XML and then display the data. Since I got the data as JSON format, I was able to just say object.productID. If I got the data as XML, I would have to parse in the XML, populate this data into an array, and then from the array, read and populate that information. So all of that additional parsing is not required if you exchange data in JSON format. JSON or JSON-P is the same. It's essentially passing JSON data either from your current domain or from a different domain.
Okay.
Okay. So, so I hope this example was helpful. I mean, again, you can make your page look really slick. You can make your page look like this. All you need is a bunch of style sheets. So here, I'm displaying the same table. You can see it has a very rich look and feel. You can generate a page like this easily by changing the style sheet for alternate rows, the style used for alternate rows, and then for headers using a different style and stuff. We'll focus on the jazzy part maybe for one final example in next week, but all of this can be programmed, and you would need to know a bit of CSS, and as long as you're familiar with whatever I showed you today, and that's adequate for handling web service. You don't need anything else. point is I can get to any element in my page using jQuery, right? Using your jQuery selectors. So it's very yeah, it's very once you know how to get to an element, you can do any action you want on that element.
I think Vikram here, at least what this example shows is, as long as we understand those basics of how to call or how to use the jQuery and call the different web services, whether they are in our within our same domain or external to the domain, as long as we have a good understanding of what is the structure of the data that is being returned, and then how we can access that.
Yeah, if you don't know
we
the
can
structure,
pretty much render anything.
Yeah, if you don't know the structure of the data that you're getting, which will typically not be the case, because if you are doing your web services, they'll tell you what that it is. You just invoke the web services from a REST client, like this in Firefox, there is REST Explorer. Similarly, there's an IE plugin and a Chrome plugin. And when you invoke the web service, you'll see what data you're getting and accordingly code it. So you will be aware of the data format that is being returned one way or the other. It's going to be available, and even if it is not, you can figure it out by using some RESTful clients like this. Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute break, and after the break, I'll just continue with jQuery UI and a few other examples.
Okay. Now, Vikram, do you want the team, the folks, to practice what you did right now today, or do we continue with the class and then they do this example later? I'm just, because in this right now we have seen a lot of information. Would it be best if they, if you take the break and then just continue working on this, and then we meet some other time? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I think it's important that everybody tries this, and I don't think they can complete it within 15-20 minutes or 30 minutes. I would rather have everybody take the time to do the example, and we'll have one final session next week, and we can go over any issues or challenges you guys have had, and then probably try to do one project related example and wrap it up. But from my perspective, I'd like to wrap the few other things that are left, because in jQuery, Prasad, it's not at all complicated. It's a question of knowing how to use it. What to use is a different question. You can just look up and then do some simple examples. But as long as you know that you should have a way to get to your selectors and stuff, that's all that is needed, Prasad. I'll show you a simple example regarding the power of jQuery. So in this application, these are all drop-down buttons, and they look like multi-select boxes here. This is all done using jQuery. So when I'm selecting this, it is automatically selecting all of this, Prasad. In order to convert a regular input element, like a text box that you saw earlier, into this multi-select boxes, it is one line of code. Now in this page, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 7 drop-down boxes. In order to change the styling on all 7 of them, and in order to transform them into multi-select boxes, I just had one line of code. I'll just show it to you. And you should be able to relate the code, because in my application also I'm using jQuery. I'm referencing all my jQuery data, jQuery scripts, and on that particular page, in order to convert all of those elements, so this is one line of code that I've used to convert all of those elements. So in this page, I had 5 input elements. I was able to perform action on all 5 of them using this one line of code. So if you look at the syntax, $, I'm invoking jQuery, and here within this double quotes, I have a I'm specifying my selector, right? And then dot, and then action, whatever. In my selector, I'm saying get me all input elements that are of type select. In HTML, select HTML element means a drop-down button, okay? So it is retrieving all the drop-down buttons in my page, and within those drop-down buttons, I'm saying, get me all the elements which have ID starting with caret equal to means starting with this particular name. So each element that I had it as CMB fulfillment mode 1, CMB fulfillment mode 2, 3, 4, and 5. So all the input elements were different. All the drop-down input elements were different, but I was able to access all of them by specifying a selector criteria like this. Look for the ID attribute for select elements where the name starts with this. Because all of them had name starts with this, I was able to get all of them, and I was able to call whatever my function is in order to transform them. I'll show you the same page without this descriptor, and you'll see that they look like your regular HTML drop-down box. So this is the page that you saw currently, right? With this style and this selectable boxes. But if I didn't use this jQuery styling and all of that, and it was a regular HTML page, I would see it like this. It's starting up. Just give me a second.
So I think as Vikram is waiting, one thing for sure, in order to get clarity or get clear on these some of these topics that we covered, the key, as Vikram said, is to create those examples and then play around with them. That's the only way you'd get an understanding of how to use them, and then.
So yeah, one thing that I'd like to stress here is if you look at an existing application, you see all of this code, it will definitely scare you away. But if you look at an example like this, you'll see that it's not all that scary, and you will be surprised. I mean, in most of the implementations that we have done, this is pretty much what you use. If you have to make this Ajax calls, I'm calling them and I'm manipulating the HTML that is displayed in the page. You just need to be familiar with a bit of HTML, and as long as somebody gives you a nice style sheet, you can apply styling to it and make it look good. But basic coding, you will be performing the same repetitive step. For calling your web services, I mean, you might be doing 10 or 20 implementations. In all of them, this is the same code that you're calling to invoke your web services. The data that you get back is obviously different from a web service to web service, and how you present the information is probably different. In this example, I'll show you this. We have these web pages where we are relying on Ajax to pretty much make the entire page as dynamic. So right now, after the page loads, we are populating this table. How do we do that? Right now, you are clicking on a button to populate the data. As soon as the page loads, what is the event that is fired by your browser? There's a document onload event or window onload event. In window onload event, I'm calling the JavaScript function, which essentially populates this table. So it is, as long as you're familiar with basic events and then this high-level jQuery code, you wouldn't need anything else. This is taking time to start up. This started up. So in this page, each drop-down is calling a separate web service to get the data. So in this, the product information is coming from SFTC web services. The categories information is coming from an internal database. Both of them are, the information is being passed by web service as JSON data. So when the page initially loads, all I had in the page is the input element for a drop-down box and an input element for each of the drop-down boxes. And each of the drop-down boxes is calling a separate web service to get the information. So this is the page that I was showing you earlier, where I'm switching between pages. you'll see that the styling is so good, and these are the elements that are selected, right, with the jQuery selector that I've used. If I don't invoke my jQuery, this is how my drop-down box looks like. So I can select multiple elements on the page like this. So see the difference between the two. The fonts look larger. It is not consistent with what you had, and the styling was not consistent. But using the jQuery selector with one line of code that was here, I was able to change so if uncomment this, now you'll see my trying to make here is, it's very powerful. One line of code is changing the styling on this entire page. So I'm just going to refresh this page, and you will see the same page differently this time around. So you'll see that one line of code changed the styling of all the elements. Now I have this neat selectors using which I'm able to select, and using jQuery I'm also simultaneously populating the other data elements. Okay. So you build your application slowly, and if you do these simple examples, you would be able to try out more complex things where there is styling involved and things like that. Okay. Okay, so it is 4:05. We'll meet at 4:15, and I'll do some. I'll talk about jQuery UI, and then we'll wrap up for today. Okay. Okay, I'm going to email this.
10 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minutes, and I'm going to email this sample page. You guys can try it out.
And I think one thing is, when we get the sample page, you should just refer to that page, but even if it's HTML or table, just because it's HTML, I know we tend to copy and paste it, but I would strongly recommend typing on your own rather than copying and pasting anything from that. Just use it solely for reference. So at least initially when you're learning, later on when you get a little bit comfortable, you can always copy and paste. But at this point, even if you go to a web page and you're trying things out, always try to type it on your own and then test it out. So that way it makes it much more comfortable, and then you actually know what you're typing. And until you get comfortable, don't copy and paste. All right. So, yeah, Vikram, if you send it to me, I'll post it to class.
Yeah, I sent it, Prasad, so you can pass it on. Okay.
Okay. So we'll meet back in 10 minutes.
And that it is doing by taking the keystroke or the character that you have typed in and doing a search for it and returning the commonly used search terms and things like that. So here they have jQuery UI has special widgets called as just a second, I forgot to record this.
Vikram, I'm recording.
Okay, I have recorded it anyway, Prasad, so that's fine. So the jQuery UI also has this special widget. So within a regular button element, if I want to, for checkboxes, instead of displaying it like a HTML regular checkbox, I can do checkboxes like this, so that it looks from a UI perspective much more rich. So within a button, you typically have only text, but if I want to display an image like this and the text, you can do that. So this is a button with an image on it. So if you want this rich UI features, you can use some of these things. Dialog boxes. If I want to display a modal dialog box, I can. It's just not working for some reason. I'll take a look at it. But The point I'm trying to make is it has all this pre-built UI controls. Menus are for dropping menus on your page like this, and you can easily generate them using uh, this menu widget that they have. If you are uploading files or something, and if you want to indicate a progress bar, you can use this progress bar widget that has been provided by jQuery UI. Similarly, if you want to display information in tabs, you can do that using again jQuery UI, and each tab content can be loaded from a separate Ajax call to the background. So it doesn't have to be coming from the same page. It can be coming from somewhere else, and that can be entirely be programmed. So these are the widgets that are currently there, and like this tooltip widget will display when you do a mouse over, it will automatically display the tooltip at the bottom. So if you want to display fancy tooltips like those, you can do that. You can take a look at all of these widgets. I mean, there are not a whole lot. There are around 12 or 13, and you can look at them using this jQueryui.com website. The code is also there. If you want to implement this, again, it will not be needed in your regular applications. But let's say if I want to provide the ability to move things around, drag things, maybe some small games for kids and things like that. You can do it easily using this draggable features that are supported by jQuery. Again, there are a whole bunch of things. You can take a look at it here. Drop is if I want to be able to support dropping in these elements in a particular location. So if I want to be able to drop it inside the div element, note that all of these are nothing but div elements. Each div element has its own ID, and you are just dropping in those there. If I want to provide a resize feature, something like I have a text box, I would like to let the users to resize it. I would be able to do that if I convert this control into a resizable element. If I want to highlight things, you can use this script. And for sorting, you can do that. So point is, we need to be able to try and do some examples to understand how it works. Usually it is straightforward code. I'm not going to do an example for each and every widget. I'll do 1 or 2 examples so that you get a sense of what it is. Date picker. Instead of you writing complex code, typically if you want users to enter date in your web page, you'll have a text box like this. But when the user clicks on it, if you use this, you'll see you have this nice date selector with all the dates without doing any programming. So I can let the user select any date, and it is going to be populated within that page. So you have some of this useful stuff. And in addition to the standard widgets, jQuery UI has these plugins. Quite a few folks have developed plugins which you might be able to use in your web pages. All you need to do is include the corresponding JavaScript for that particular plugin. So if you want to take a look at list of plugins, just click on plugin, and here you will see that there are UI, there are 433 plugins, and for file upload there's a plugin. So you can use any plugin that meets your needs. Again, you don't need to know any of them. I'm just showing you your way around. If you have something that's not available in a standard widget, just look for these plugins. Every plugin has their own home page or a demo page, using which you'll be able to. So this plugin is for file upload. So if you want to provide this file upload capabilities, clicking on this, and so if you want to provide these features, if I click on this, you can let the user onto the server, and on the server side you will be writing code to handle the corresponding file that has been uploaded to your server. So using the file selector, I'm just uploading a text file. So it's saying file type not allowed. But the point is, currently I mean, it has been coded so that it allows only this formats to be uploaded. But when you have a version of this plugin implemented on your website, you can indicate which file types are supported and which file types are not. I'm not going to spend time here. Let me go do a simple example on jQuery UI. So for jQuery UI, I'll do some of the common things that you would be using, which is this collapsible panels that is there in your okay. So let me do this. Forget about the styling part of it. I'm not going to spend much time on styling it. I want you to understand the basics here. So I'll build a basic HTML page without this accordion feature, and then I'll show you another page with the accordion features. So how does our HTML page, any HTML page start? It always starts with HTML. Just complete that HTML tag just to be sure. Your head section, your body section. Okay. Now within the header section, I'm going to put in a title for this page. So what do you need to do to include jQuery in your page? You would need to reference the standard jQuery library, and here we have it at the top. I'm not going to type it again. Okay, so I'm referencing the jQuery URL, and I'm just going to create a simple page with multiple div elements. It's a good practice to give a unique name to each of your elements. So I'll say div ID equal to, I'm just going to call it as the accordion. Okay. So in this page, in this particular page, I'm going to display 3 or 4 sections as collapsible panels. So what I'm going to do here is, for each of the sections, I'm going to have some header tags. I'm mimicking whatever examples that they have provided, but I'm just typing in so that you know how it is written from scratch. Within this particular first tab, let's say I want to display some content, I will put it again in the div element. And I'll copy some content from some website. Okay, so far this is the parent div container. Within the parent div container, I had a header element. Within the header element, I had a div tag. I'm going to put in another section, section 2, and in here I will put it. In HTML, if you want to display a bunch of bulleted lists, you have a tag called UL, which means unordered list. UL stands for ordered list. So instead of numbering, if you want to use bullet points, you use UL tag, and each element in the UL tag will be specified with LI, which stands for list item. So unordered list containing this list item. And I'm going to have, let's say, 4 or 5 bullet points. Okay, then I'll have another section, another header, within which I'll have another development. Along with it, I'll have another development. And I'll close this development. So far, we haven't used any of the jQuery functions. I'm going to call it as okay, so without doing any formatting, this is how it is appearing. I have put in some content into section 1, put in some content into section 2 with bulleted points, and some into section 3 with nothing much, not much of a text. All of this are part of one parent element, which is your all of my data is part of your div tag. So now using jQuery UI, again I told you jQuery UI is a separate library. I would be able to convert it so that I can do collapsible panels like how you are doing it here. So instead of displaying all the sections in one shot, I will display that as collapsible panels. So if you look at the API, in order to call this jQuery accordion function, all you have to do is get that root element and then call the dot accordion method. Again, here I'm trying to pick the jQuery UI website. So in order to use that script, a jQuery UI needs to be on your local server, or you need to reference the file from the web server. It's always better to download the file onto your local server, but since I'm running it from my desktop, I'm just downloading, I'm referencing the file from the server itself. Again, the URL is http://code.jquery.com. So this is the URL, and I want this page to be converted as soon as the page loads up. So what are the various ways in which I can invoke a JavaScript function as soon as the page is loaded in the client browser? There are various ways to do it. So regular JavaScript, you can say document.onload equals call some JavaScript function. Some JavaScript function like this, or another way to do it is within the body tag you can say onload equals to set accordion, or third way, which is the preferred way to do it, would be using jQuery ready function, so which is the same event. As soon as the page loads, it will be fired. So $document.ready and close the curly brace, parenthesis, and then the semicolon. So instead of this, we should, this is the old way of doing it with jQuery. You would rather do it with this document ready function. Document refers to the current window or the document object. So within this, since I'm referencing this jQuery UI function, now I'm going to say I want to get this object in jQuery. So what would be my selector? Dollar in double quotes hash, and I will give the ID of this element, and then I have to call the accordion function. I'm not worrying about any styling stuff here. I'm just focusing on functionality. So if I go back to my page, which is seen like this, if I refresh my page, as soon as the document loads, that event is going to be triggered. It's probably downloading the JavaScript file. So as you can see here, the section 2 and section 3 are collapsed and they are not displayed. Only section 1 is displayed. Obviously, it's not looking neat with a lot of empty space. That's because of inappropriate style. So now if I click on section 2, section 1 is going to be collapsed. If I click on section 3, section 2 is going to be collapsed. So did we write any code here? The only piece of code that we wrote in this particular case is this one line of code, which essentially converts or gives you this rich look and feel. So as soon as you put in appropriate styling information, right, just like this web page on jQuery UI, immediately it will start looking like this. So you'll get this rich look and feel. And the only way he's doing this is by referencing their own style sheet, and by referencing these two style sheets. So let's see what happens if we reference those two style sheets, because it's available there on the public domain. So a link is how you reference a style sheet. I'm going to say http:// this is my jQuery UI.cs link. I'm referencing jQuery already, so I don't need to reference the script. I don't need to reference this jQuery UI script. This is a relative URL he has given. I'm converting it into an absolute URL because this page is running from our desktop and not from theirs. So now if I convert this page, the styling will look a little different. So as you can see here, they put in this arrows to appear. Obviously those arrows have gone down, but I have this bar, and if I click on section 2, section 2 is expanded, section 3 is expanded. Okay, so that is just styling. Just by including those two style sheets, I was able to achieve that look and feel. Typically in your projects, the style sheets will be given by your creative team or somebody else. You as a developer can also create those style sheets, obviously using IDE like Visual Studio or Eclipse, whatever may be the IDE. Okay, but I mean, more often than not, as developers, you would be focused on implementing functionality rather than having to create the look and feel. Once they give you a style sheet, you will just code for it, but creating the style sheets is not your primary job. Okay. Any questions regarding accordion? Okay. Out of this widgets, this collapsible panel is something that is commonly used. I'm just trying to see if there is something else. Tabs are also used. And the beauty of tabs is the content for each one of those pages could be coming from a different page, And when you click on the tab at that particular point of time, it can do a round trip to the server and get the content for that page. So that way you would be able to retrieve this information dynamically. And dialog boxes is something else that you commonly use. Dialog boxes again to display a modal dialog box. Yeah, modal dialog boxes for some reason is not working here, but yeah. So our menus are also used. If you want to display menus, you can do that. I'll do an example on date picker. That's another thing that is used commonly. So if I have to display a date or whatever. So without using jQuery, there is no default date picker functionality in HTML. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to, instead of typing in again from scratch, I'm going to save this page as datepicker.html. Again, for date picker, you'll be using the same scripts, same jQuery.min.js and jQuery UI.js. I told you typically when you create input elements, they are always within a form. So even if you don't specify the form properties, for now at least start putting in the form tags. And I'm just going to create something called as a contact form. So I'm going to put in some table row. Cell in the column is let's say in order to create a HTML input element called a text box, I'll have to say input type equal to text, name equal to txt, contact name, size is equal to 32. It's always a good idea to put in all your property values in double quotes. I'm indenting so that you clearly know whether you're doing it correctly or not. The browser will display even if you mess up some of the HTML. They're smart enough to do that. So here I'm going to put in another field called in country list. I'll specify it as a drop-down box. For a drop-down list, you populate the entries using option tags. Option value equal to empty, and I'll just display please select a country. You always specify some default so that users don't forget it. Option value equal to USA. I'll put in another field called contact date, and I am expecting the user to enter a date. Let's say feedback date. Okay, and finally I'll just put in, I'm just typing in all these HTML elements, so the input elements, so that you guys know, if some of you are new to HTML, what are the different types of input elements. I'm going to put in a text area box to indicate feedback, or in order to create a text area box input element, you have a tag called text area. It has property called rows, which are the number of lines it should show, and columns is the width. And if you want to put in some default content in it, you put in that content in between this. Similarly, you have radio buttons and checkboxes. I'm not going to enter all of those. Let's see this page. And again, we are not doing accordion, so I'm going to leave the document ready function as is, but there will be no code in it. If I take a look at this particular page, okay, so this is more like your feedback form, contact name, country list. When I click on this, let's say I want to invoke this calendar function. Typically, users, I expect them to put in like this, but everybody is not going to put it in the same way, and there are going to be some typos. Some might enter numbers, some might not. So the best way to do it would be to prevent errors would be to use this jQuery calendar function. So for the jQuery calendar function, you have to specify the input element, which should start behaving like a calendar. I don't know why this is freezing up. So in order to invoke, in order to convert any element into a date picker control, you have to give that, you have to get hold of that element and then call the date picker function. So in this case, I want to convert this txt feedback date field into a date selector date element. So you can specify any selector criteria. In this case, since I have the ID, the best way is I specify the ID by using hash txt feedback date. And so where am I initializing this? I'm initializing this on the page load event. As soon as the page gets loaded, immediately this control, this txt feedback date control is transformed into a date picker control. This is similar to the drop-down example that I showed you earlier. After the page load, immediately the regular HTML drop-down is transformed into a rich UI element. So currently you don't have the ability to select dates and stuff even if I click on it. I'm going to refresh the page. Okay. Now I'm going to click on this. You'll see my dates are here. Obviously the formatting is not nice because I forgot to include some style sheets that it probably needs. is tied to a standard form input element. Clicking on the button would trigger invoking it. So here, what is it that I need? So I would need to include some style sheet, I guess, to make it look nice. So as you can see here, as soon as I included the style sheets, now you have this control, and if you select it, the date value will be populated here. Okay. If I have to retrieve value for any of these input elements, how do I get it? I can say document.formName.elementName.value, or I can say document.getElementById, specify the ID of the each of these elements, and then say .value. Or best way to do it is using jQuery $#ID.val. We'll get the values of each one of these input elements if you have to retrieve them in JavaScript. Any questions? So jQuery UI is just to make your UI look good. You have seen this accordion example. We have seen the date picker. Similarly, this other widgets, I don't think others, I will leave them to you. Tabs is another thing where I can specify a separate URL for loading within each tab, and it happens asynchronously. I can do an example, but I would rather have you guys do it. I'll show you our
scroll bar, Vikram.
What is it?
Scroll bar, like I have to display like around 2000 records. So to scroll down and up in the page, can
okay. So what you can do is, I mean, scroll bar is there for all elements by default, Rani. So earlier I mean, if you don't specify anything, obviously you have to scroll the browser. We did this example, right? Which example was this?
Products.html.
Yeah, products.html. So I'll take you to this page, Rani. And if you look at this example right now, I'm scrolling on the page to go down, right? Let's say I have to display this information only within the top 10 lines or something like that. What you could do is, it's just a div element. So go back to products.html. It is just, so we are displaying the products within this div element, right?
Yeah.
So you can do style equal to and control the height of that element, Rani. If I don't specify height, it assumes everything. So height is, let's say, 350 pixel. Okay, this is just a style sheet property, Rani. We are not doing anything there. Okay, so for this div element, I have specified the style sheet should be, in the style sheet, I specified that its height should be whatever, 350 pixel or whatever. So if I, yeah, I pushed it around, I probably need to clean it up. Yeah, but you can essentially control that, Rani, by setting in the properties. I'll take a look at this, why this is not being respected. But
actually, Vikram, when you changed it, it did push that button down by 350 pixels. But when it is rendering it again, that's when it is removing it.
Right, right. So.
Oh yeah.
So what I'm doing is I'm coding so that this table gets displayed within a particular div elements, and scrolling is automatically enabled on any div element running. So yeah, you can control that. Okay, it might be IE that is acting up. I'll take a look at it, but so the way you control that scrolling is by I'll see what. So since I'm using tables, it is not liking it, but I think but you should be able to do it by controlling the div elements height and width properties running.
Okay.
Okay. I think there is some auto scroll property, I think. I don't know. I'll have to just check that enables that. Again, we'll try.
And Vikram, one other question. Nowadays, with especially with HTML5 or even with jQueries and all that, more and more you see people moving away from table. And
yeah, you wouldn't use tables. You would always use div tags. But again, even using a table, I can control this. It's not a big deal. You should be able to control it. So in here, Rani, if you look at our application, right now, yeah, let me go back to the search. So when you have lot of data, besides the browser scroll bars, this is a div element, and for that div element, I can indicate the height and width, and scrolling would be enabled by default on that element. So you can present the same results within the height and width you want by enabling horizontal and vertical scrolling.
Okay.
Let me just search for so typically you would do it in an editor, and auto scrolling would be a property since we are typing it. Div auto scrolling. Yeah, overflow I think is what it is. And again, this property is different based on the browser running. So there might be some issues. Overflow scroll. Okay. Even if it doesn't work, I'll tell you the exact property, but it is just controlled through the property running, nothing else.
Okay, I think you got it.
Yeah. Okay. So here you can see you have the scrolling bar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh. Okay.
I put in two div elements. I control this styling in two div elements. That's why it put in two. I'll remove it from the HTML that I was generating dynamically. So now you'll see you have a single scroll bar, and I can, okay, so you haven't reached the browsing scrolling area, but since for the div element you defined the height, and you said if there's an overflow, then automatically scroll. So it generated the scroll bars for you.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for next week, I already sent you this product list example, right? What I want you guys to do is try out this example. In addition, in a page, I want you to populate a drop-down list based on the same web service call that we made. Instead of displaying it in a table like this, I want a drop-down list to be populated. So that would be a small change to what we did. The process would exactly be the same. The HTML that you generated might be slightly different because for a drop-down, you need to generate option elements and not a table and TR tags. So try out this example, And after you're done with it, then try out populating a drop-down box. Okay. One last thing before
Vikram,
I actually
just to clarify on the drop-down list. So you want to drop down, create an option element to show the product name, and then when you select that product name, it would behind the scenes it will select that ID. Is that what you want?
No. So in a plain HTML page, I want you to display a drop-down called product list. After the page loads, the script should automatically populate the drop-down list by calling the web service and retrieving the product name for each of the entries and populating them into the list box. We did a country list example, right? We did a country list example last week, but there we hard-coded the values of the country names that are populated through the code.
Right.
Instead of hard-coding it, I'm asking you to call this web service and populate it.
So in the drop-down list, we'll just populate the product name.
Yeah, drop-down list, populate the product name.
Okay.
Okay. And one last thing that I would like to cover is jQuery has some of these utility functions. So if you have a particular object, you can check whether it is an array or not, if it is an empty object, if the returned text is XML or not. And loop is just to loop and not do anything. Parse JSON is if you have a regular string, it will convert it into a JSON object if you use this parse JSON function. Besides this utility function, it also provides you with the ability to extend existing functions. So you can do that by specifying your function within jQuery.fn. Whatever your function name is. So right now in jQuery, there is no method to center your elements and stuff. Let's say I want to write a piece of code that would center any element in that particular page based on the coordinates of the browser window. So the way I would do it is you say jQuery.fn. Whatever that function name is, which is center, equal to whatever piece of code that needs to be executed, which is this function. Here I put in some dummy example for calculating the width of the browser window and then determining what the center position is and what the top position is. If I have to call the center function, you have to specify whatever those selectors are. In this case, I'm selecting an element by using its ID, and then say dot, and then you can call your custom function name. So it's not as if when you're working with jQuery that you're invoking the standard jQuery. You can write your own custom jQuery function and then just invoke it like any other jQuery function. That's how all your jQuery plugins are created. jQuery UI. How are you calling? jQuery UI is an extension of jQuery, right? How are you calling the accordion example? I'm just saying after my element, I say dot accordion. If I have to invoke the date picker functionality after select my elements, I'll say dot date picker, and that function is immediately calling another piece of code that is embedded in the jQuery UI.js file to transform it into into that particular element. So jQuery is quite extensible, and that is the beauty of it. So that essentially wraps up discussion on jQuery. Next week I want to do a simple project. I mean, these are more theoretical examples, so I want to do a simple project comprising a login page and maybe a contact list page and a contact info page by developing them from scratch, assuming that these web services are already available. When you are consuming web services, it doesn't matter whether you're consuming the web services from your own server or from some remote services or some public web services. You can convert them however. Besides consuming or besides being familiar with this Ajax programming, jQuery helps you give a look into your application using this UI widgets and stuff, which is also something that we have looked at. And it also allows you to select any part of your page, any element in your page, and manipulate either the look and feel or the actual content itself. So we are taking a look at all those aspects with simple examples. Now we'll just put it into a simple project. We'll try to do some fancy styling also to make it look very professional in the next class. So there'll be, I think from a theoretical perspective, we have covered it all. we'll just do one final project in the next class and we'll wrap it up. So if you guys have any questions, next class would be the last chance to ask. Okay. So Prasad, I've emailed you the updated slides, and I've also emailed you the example. So, I think anything else?
Yeah, so have you sent the accordion and the date picker files as well, Vikram?
Yeah, I'll send them now, Prasad.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have uploaded these documents, and I've actually sent the main link to the folder. So as long as you access the folder, you should be able to get access the presentation, and as well as all the sample exercises that Vikram has used in the class, which you can use as a reference for your own practice.